How we doing? Gents, welcome to the first episode of Budget, Save and Invest. Do you want to do a little intro for yourselves?
Sure. Chris Gray, grew up in the UK, now a buyer's agent and property investor myself, and ex-TV host.
Hi there, guys. Jon Sermon, again, another POM, grew up in the UK, moved here 2010, a property investor and buyer's agent for your empire.
And those of you that don't know me, I just sort of took over the group about 3 months ago and been lurking in the background while we've been setting up websites and getting the podcast ready and things of that nature. And so this is the first episode, and I've got to stop moving, otherwise the camera's going to keep wobbling. So yeah, what I want to do first, guys, is quickly, while we've got rate topics on the charge for next week, what are our predictions?
Oh, look, I never predict these things. I'm investing for 30 or 40 years, and so I know over 30 or 40 years we're going to have ups and downs. I've been the host on Sky News for 10 years, and that's what the media want you. They want you so behind all these things, but ultimately it doesn't make a difference. The idea of buying is you should be buying before that rate cut, because ideally then everyone's in the doldrums and there's not many people going to auction. Whereas if we do get that rate reduction, and then suddenly that encourages everyone else to get in the market, their serviceability is increasing, they're more positive, the price moves. So that's why I try and avoid all these things. And if anything, be the complete contrarian and doing it at the opposite time. But I think it will go down.
In short, John, your thoughts, a rate cut next week?
Yeah, I like to be optimistic. I could do with a rate cut myself. Look, I think if not Feb, March. But let's just go for Feb to put the line in the sand.
Yeah, I'm predicting next week. We've had a couple of banks just sort of start reducing their fixed rates, which is normally an early indicator that that's the way things are going. They try and lock you in on a rate that's 0.4, 0.5% cheaper than the variable, and it's basically because that their economists have predicted that the variable rate is going to come down. So you'll actually be worse off jumping on the fixed rate, which is why we stick about 99% of our customers onto the variable rates. So your buyer's agency, obviously been around for a long time. We've been working together for a while now. What's the favorite sort of strategy for your customers, clients?
Yeah, look, we've been running, I think, 21 years this month in February. So yeah, it's been quite a long time. And when we started, then there was maybe only 10 buyers agents in Sydney. Now there's obviously 1,000,001. Most of the original guys are still around. We've always been very, very traditional. So we don't go and follow the kind of get rich, try and make a fortune overnight. Because again, the 10 years I've had on Sky News, you see all the horror stories, people making a fortune, but then losing a fortune as well. So I guess our target market is typically intelligent, logical, professional people that are in there for the long term. And so ideally we go for the blue chip markets. And the blue chip, we say, is avoid the CBD because there's no limit of supply. You can keep building these tall towers, and you can see those behind me, and not many Aussies want to live there. Whereas if you go that kind of 5 to 10Ks, so that Eastern Beaches, Low North Shore in the West, they're solid, they're 3-story height limits, there's no more property. Lots of young people with cash and good jobs and wealthy parents want to live there. And that's the thing that drives price. You're not going to double your money overnight, but you're not going to halve it either. And so through the COVIDs, the GFCs, the credit crunches, it's always been a solid market for both rental and for capital growth. And so we've done that for forever.
Yeah, it makes sense, especially if you're migrating across to Australia. You're not going to want to live anywhere sort of too far away from the beach. The whole point of coming here is for sun, sea and sand, right?
Absolutely.
Exactly. Hence the shiny foreheads.
And where are you guys both living at the moment? Obviously, you've got your own strategies. What are you adopting yourselves?
So me personally, I live in Pyrmont, so just behind Darling Harbour. So I guess I adopt a strategy called rent vesting. And so I rent in a big block in Pyrmont. It's got the gyms, the lifts, the pools, all the facilities. But I've got a few investment properties in Bondi that I've bought back in 15 and 17. And really, I guess to Chris's point, just I've held them for the long term. So one of the things with Sydney that's different to the other states is very much scarcity of land. And so because we're pretty much surrounded by water, and to your point, Ross, everybody wants to be near the beach or close proximity to the water or the CBD. That's where there's a very short supply, but really, really high demand. So I adopt that mentality because it's near the CBD, but I don't pay for all those bells and whistles. But I've got a few units in the eastern suburbs.
Yeah, and look, I'm the same. If you can tell from the background, and that is a real background. It's a rough day in Sydney at the moment. There's no blue sky, but in Darling Point, between Rushcutters Bay and Double Bay, whole floor apartment. There's lifts, gyms, pools, saunas, manicured gardens, all of that stuff, which there's no way I'm paying for. So I rent vest, and I've been here for 12 years. I've then got a whole bunch of $1 or $2 million properties in kind of Maroubra, Coogee, Tamarama, and a couple in the UK, all blue chip. I've had them for since so I'm 53 now. I bought them in my 20s and early 30s. So a lot I've had for 20 or 30 years, and they've doubled and doubled and doubled and get a good kind of 3.5%, 4% yield. Whereas I typically rent $5 or $10 million homes and pay about 1 or 2%.
Yeah, and for those that don't understand what blue chip means, just give us the basics on what a blue chip investment looks like.
Yeah. So in terms of that location, it's basically suburbs that have been around forever, that are renowned as being upmarket suburbs that aren't cheap. So they're the most expensive suburbs in the country, but we're still buying around the median price. So we're not talking about spending 100, 200 million in Point Piper. We're talking about 1 to 2 million, but we will go down to say 700 for maybe studios in the kind of the Coogis, the Bondis, the Manleys, the Balmains, the Leichhardts, the names that everyone knows, that they're really solid suburbs and there is no more supply of property. And that's where, I guess, nice, professional, wealthy people want to live without paying a fortune. And the reason we don't go above that kind of $2 million is because then the rental yield comes down, because not many people can afford it. So the yield comes down, and that's why we rent vest. So the idea is, like Monopoly, you buy those $1 or $2 million houses that people land on all the time, and then you go and rent the hotel on Mayfair or Park Lane type thing.
John, obviously, like what's the sort of insight behind going for the affordable property? Why not go for the cheap property up the Central Coast or down in Wollongong or in Penrith? Why try and find that affordable property, and why not go for the super expensive one either? What's the theory behind that?
Yes, I think a lot of it's down to supply and demand. And so the further you get away from the CBD, there's obviously more land. So there's more supply of land. And you could argue there's not the demand of people that want to live there. Whereas if you drive around the eastern suburbs or the lower North Shore on a Saturday, you'll see queues of people that want to potentially rent those apartments because they want that lifestyle. And so that's the bit that is the main driver. Plus also, you can't build in those, what Chris referred to as the blue chip areas anymore as well. So if you wanted to build something new, you'd have to knock down a block of apartments to build something new because there's not the land there. And so that's the main thing that drives that capital growth, which is what most people rely on in their asset for the property, is it increasing in value. So that's why we tend to go for that kind of median price point in the median suburb, because most people can afford to live there. Whereas when you look at rural, yes, you might get a 3 or 4 bedroom home, but you can argue, well, who's your tenants? Who wants to live there? Because most people want to live in a proximity to the CBD and then have that lifestyle too.
Yeah, we see it all the time. Obviously, I'm in and out of people's salaries and wages all day, every day, with mortgage brokering. And you do seem to see like a correlation between couples, how much they earn as an average income earner and where they can buy. And then obviously those properties are the most, if you're getting a pre-approval at $700,000, $800,000, $900,000, that's going to be a purchase price of 800,000, $900,000 up to maybe 1.2 million. And they're really the ones that are going to grow the most. We're doing valuations. We did a valuation on one of our joint mutual customers who bought a 1-bedroom apartment in Vaucluse for just over $1 million last year, and it's valued at 1.25 already. And it's because it's the median, just about affordable place where people can enter for most income earners. So I think that's a really important point.
And I think certainly for the younger audience as well, and the younger couples, is there's this stigma around you must buy your dream home as your first home. And so this is where I think it's learning how to think a little bit differently and speak to brokers, speak to people that do it themselves, and just get information. You don't have to take it on board, but it's just learning the nuances of how to do things in different ways to then say, well, what works for us now? Because a lot of people will naturally say, well, let's buy our dream home now, but they can't afford it now. or they then aspire to have children, and as you would see, Ross, the cost of living or their costs increases. Whereas I think to Chris's point, when you can rent where you want to live, but still be on the ladder and buy maybe some investment properties at that median price point, you've still got assets rising, which then gives you options later on in life. So I guess it's just learning what to do, what not to do, and then surrounding yourself with a team of people that have done it themselves too.
And it's really changed over the years, because the rent vesting concept came up from a speech I did probably about 10 years ago at the Home Buyer Show. So every year they used to do the Home Buyer Shows in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. And a PR agent that was talking about the show came up with a name for a speech I was doing. So I certainly didn't invent it. And I think the name was actually brought up by some LJ Hooker people a few years before. And the whole thing was wealthy people would always be embarrassed to say that they rent, whereas I wasn't, because as an accountant, I knew that the numbers worked for me. And so, again, we used to say on Sky News, I come into this building and I used to drive a bright purple Lamborghini, but all the other owners in the building used to look down on me as we're the poor renters. We're the dark side of the building because we can't afford to buy, we're renting. But little did they realise, because they never watched Sky News, of I was renting it for about a quarter of the price that they were paying to own it, and I could get better rentals later on. And so now rent vesting, it's a common word that probably 1 in every 2 investors understands. And there is no bad thing about renting. And the only thing about renting is rent money is only dead money if you don't invest the equivalent somewhere else, whether it's in property, shares or business. But that's the thing, is if you just rent and you do nothing else, that's bad. But as long as you put the equivalent money into something else, then that's seen as a good thing.
Yeah. And actually, renting gives you flexibility. So I'm in Willoughby now. My daughter's turning 5 in August. She's turning 5 in August. I hope my
You should
missus
know
isn't
that,
watching
mate.
this.
Quicker.
But the beauty of renting is we're now looking at catchment areas for schools, and I can move. I don't have to go to Willoughby East, which is where we're living now. I can move up to St Ives, go to St Ives North. I can go down to Pymble. I can go up to the Northern Beaches. I can choose where I want to go based on catchment zones, and I've got the flexibility. When you're an owner-occupier and you're stuck in that area, if you want to move or change schools, you're going to have to sell that property, or you're going to have to, move out, rent it. And you've likely purchased it as your dream home, and it probably doesn't rent that well or give you the returns that you necessarily want. So yeah, I think the stigma has changed slightly. You do still talk to a lot of old school people that are like, "Oh, are you renting?" And you can see in their brain they're like, "Oh, they're not on the ladder." Like there is a bit of judgment there, but those of us that know the strategy, care.
But also, it's about whether you're a positive or negative person, because you're finding out now is like when you have a newborn baby, you don't want to be living in an apartment, because if the baby's asleep in the car, you want to be able to drive into your garage, get all the bags out of the car without waking the baby or taking the baby out of the car, which if you've got a garage that's internal within the house, you don't have to worry, especially if it's raining. Whereas when the kids get older, then they want a backyard to run around. And then again, you go through the school stage. And again, as they go from 1 to 5 to 10 to 15, they want completely different things. And later, when they're teenagers, they're not going to use a back garden. So the amount of people that had houses up in places like Dural, and the dad's got a tennis court that takes him 2 hours to clean. He's got the grass that takes him 4 hours to clean, 2 hours for the pool. It's taking him a whole day out of his life, and the kids don't even use it.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And, for now, for us, it works to rent a property here, with a small garden, low maintenance. I've got a double garage out the back where I can go and switch off or hide for a couple of hours if I need to. But also, I have the flexibility next year to move and change, and the rent vesting strategy works. I think the only time that really, for me personally, the way that I view it, that you would need to necessarily settle down or feel like you've got your own home is essentially when the kids have moved out. And at that point, hopefully you've built a massive portfolio by then, and you could either sell it down or leverage off that to buy your dream home or build your dream home or renovate your dream home or whatever you want to do with it.
Well, we're actually getting there now, because our son's got the last 6 months of school doing his HSC. Our daughter's a couple of years behind. But if anything, I'd actually argue it's even more that we want to rent, because you haven't got the kids and they're not tied to a school, and because we haven't got regular jobs and we work from home. the whole idea is we could go to Thailand for 3 months, and then Europe for 3 months, and then somewhere else, or even just go to the city, or go to Manly, or just try even go to Queensland or something like that, or down to Sorrento in Melbourne for the summer or something. That's the thing, you've got the flexibility that you're not tied to that massive mortgage and that home. And even though it's capital gains free, it still costs you 2 or 3% to sell, 5 or 6% to rebuy. So you're still throwing away 10%, which on a $1 to $5 million home is 100 to 500 grand.
Yeah, this is why I always say to people when they're looking to buy their first property, if they're going to live in it and use the first home buyer schemes and things of that nature, then you need to look at it as a long-term investment play, because it's not your dream home. It's likely that you can't afford your dream home straight away. So if you're going to use the first home buyer scheme to enter the market, you've only got to live in it for 12 months in order to go and rent it out, and you can enter the market with a 5% deposit and some solicitors fees. But a lot of people, they just don't want to, they don't want to do that. In which case your money shouldn't just be sat there in a savings account. You should be putting it into an investment property or talking to a financial advisor about where to structure it. But ultimately, if you're, it's going to be much, much harder to save than it is to just be in the market and let the property market do its thing, because it's going to double every 10 years. What do people need to, sorry, go on, John.
I was going to say, it's a good point you made, because we see that quite a lot with people that are interested to buy property, but they think they can save more than the properties are going up. And so this is the benefit of, I guess, having time in the market and an asset increasing, is most people can't save 100 grand in a year. And so that's where sometimes it's the best time to buy a property is when they speak to someone like you and they can actually get pre-approved. Where interest rates are at the moment, and you can probably talk to this, Ross, is there's a lot of people that can't get pre-approved because of serviceability, because of their lifestyle costs. So a lot of what we're saying to clients is, if you can get pre-approved, now's the best time to buy. Because if the property prices keep increasing like they have traditionally in Sydney, you can't save what they're going to increase by, so you're actually going backwards. And so that's when it's the best time to take action is now.
Yeah, 100%. What do people need to look out for? So if you're in the market for a house versus an apartment, I mean, a lot of people especially if you're based in Sydney, you're probably going to be entering the market buying an apartment. What are the sort of things that people need to look out for when they're on the search for an apartment?
Look, I think the best thing to do to start is, when you're looking at your budget, don't go to Domain and type in what's for sale for your budget. So let's say you're pre-approved for $1 million. Don't go and say what's for sale for $1 million in the area that you want to live. Look at what has sold in the area that you want to live in the last 6 months, because that's real information. And therefore, that's going to manage your expectations about what it looks like, where it's going to be, how many bedrooms you're going to have, are you going to have parking, is it going to be near the beach, is it going to be near the CBD? And then it will reshape your experience around just expectations. Because a lot of people that we see get frustrated, they get disappointed through missing out at auction, things being sold before they've even heard of it. And let's not, I don't mean to be flippant about money, but $1 million is a lot of money to people. But in Sydney, that's the kind of median price point of a 1-bedroom unit. Your 2-bedroom units, that kind of 1.5 to 2 million in the Bluechip area. So it's important to know what your money can buy you, because if this is going to be your home or your investment, you want to know that it's real. So that would be the first thing I'd say. Anything to add, Chris?
Yeah, and one of the things for a lot of people listening will be, I don't want to buy a unit because land appreciates, buildings depreciate, so I want to buy a house. And that rule is cool. But there's a subtitle to that rule these days, and it's actually about the quality of the land. So typically we would go and buy what the median price gets you in the area. So Sydney, say 1.5 million, that would get you a unit. Down in Melbourne, that would get you, say, a townhouse or a semi. Anywhere else in Australia, you get a house, because that's what the average person lives in. And so if you think for Sydney, you get a studio or a 1-bedder for $1 million. In Melbourne, you get maybe a 2-bedder. Anywhere else, you get a 3-bedroom house. And say in the Northern Territory, you get, 1,000 acres. But like John said before, is if you go in the middle of summer, are there going to be 50 people queuing to get that 1,000 acres in the Northern Territory? Or maybe that house in Adelaide or in Queensland or something like that. So it's all about the quality of the land. You've still got $1 million invested in each market. And when you see all of those graphs from CoreLogic about capital growth, it's all about dollars in the market. So at time, I would definitely rather a 50 or 60 square metre one bedroom in Bondi for $1 million than 1,000 acres in the Territory as two different extremes.
Yeah, I think people also underestimate the fact that things get rezoned every now and then, right?
Yeah, but also $1 million in Sydney is cheap. There's lots of other people that have spent 2 or 3 million. Whereas if you look in those same suburbs, wherever you're looking around the country, it's not often that suddenly someone else has paid 2 or 3 times or even 10 times the price in that same street.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to rattle off some questions to sort of end the episode. There's been we get roughly around 20 people trying to sort of submit questions that they want to ask into the group every single day. So I've just got a few here that have been submitted. I just want to know your thoughts on it. So first one here, very, 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 very lucky individual. So it says, hello, all my siblings and I have inherited $1 million each. Our mum has passed away. I'm a 25-year-old female. I have no kids, 2 cats. I have a partner of 6 years. We are not married. I have no other investments. I'm looking to see a financial advisor and thinking about engaging a buyer's agent. What should I do?
Do you want me to take that one?
Go.
I think definitely go and see a financial advisor just to get a sense of kind of goals, thoughts, situations. So, if it sounds like the parents are from overseas or the deceased is from overseas, so go and see someone that can give you a really holistic thought, view, and opinion in terms of your situation. And then knowing that property is a bit like a sport here in Australia and obviously a massive wealth creation tool, then have a conversation with the buyer's agent in terms of what the purpose of that is, whether they want to buy an investment or buy a home.
Yep. And look, I actually saw this online and I saw some of the comments. And I think, look, all of these online things, and obviously we're talking for the channel here, is, look, it's good to get lots of different opinions. But just like watching Married at First Sight and stuff like that, is there is a lot of opinions and not everyone's going to be polite. And I know there's different things about the partner and people make assumptions about your situation. So look, certainly it's a good environment to get lots and lots of different ideas. But just remember, not everyone's a professional advisor on there. And some people are just sticking their oar in, or they're actually trying to wind you up at the same time. So look, getting lots of professional advice, reading books. I'm getting my kids to read a book a month at the moment to get some general advice. And again, get your advisors to make sure that they're pro-property or at least they're independent. So typically with financial advisors, most of them are tipped to say, I'll put that $1 million into shares, and that's how they make their commission. Whereas if you pay them a fee, they then should be completely independent. And so, sure, there's free advisors, but they're not going to work for free. They're going to be biased. So even though it's hard to shell out some money, but I would say out of $1 million, I'd allocate 5 or 10 grand to professional advice from accountants, financial planners, people like that, to actually get some decent advice that is truly independent.
Yeah. And I would probably say to that individual, there's absolutely no rush. Stick it in a savings account, go and spend 3, 6, 12 months talking to all the right people before you start putting your money into all sorts of things, and definitely don't put it into crypto.
But it is an amazing start for people. There's lots of people that $1 million now in your 20s can set you up for the rest of your life if you do something good. And the quicker you're trying to earn the return, the more risky it is that you could lose a lot. So maybe a bit of diversification as well.
There you go. Cool. I've got the next one here, a buyer's agent question. What are the benefits of going with a buyer's agent? Do they have access to off-market property?
Okay, John?
I'll let you drive on this one.
Okay. So look, buyer's agents, to give you a different example, because obviously I'm biased as a buyer's agent, I went to buy my wife a car about 5 or 6 years ago. And until then, I only bought a car every 5 years or so. For me to go out and buy a car, I've got no knowledge and I'm surrounded by a bunch of dealers. What I did was I found the car I wanted that I was prepared to pay a certain price, call it say 100 grand. And I then went to a buyer's agent who had been buying cars for the last 20 or 30 years. He was buying hundreds and hundreds of cars a year as a fleet buyer. He could then plug into his network to look across the whole of Australia to get me a car, probably a better car with less mileage, with more specs for less money. And then I only paid him a percentage of what I saved. That's a no-brainer. How can I compete as an individual with someone that's done it for 20 or 30 years? And the same with buyer's agents for property. So we've got a guy full-time that worked as an agent for 10 years for McGrath, then he's worked for me for about 15 years. All he does all day long is speak to agents about buying deals. He does roughly about 50 a year, and he's done that for the last 10 or 15 years. For Joe Public to try and compete with that, it's almost impossible, because Joe Public comes up to try and buy a property and says, give me an off market, and says, yeah, I'll give you $1 million tomorrow, generally doesn't turn up, or then starts haggling with the price or the details. Whereas if they've done it with Kel before, all those times over 15 years, they know it's going to happen. Now, a lot of people think it's purely about the off market. But if I'm selling a property that's worth $1 million, and I always think it's the best property in the world, I'm going to be wanting 1.1. So sometimes we actually tell the agents, even if we've got an off market purely to ourselves, that we say put it on the market to show them that they're not going to get that 1.1, and then we go in with $1 million afterwards. But just because it's an off market doesn't mean that it's a good price. It could be off market and you get it for 1.1. And also, agents say these are off markets, but every buyer's agent and everyone on the database knows about it. A true off market means only we have got it, no one else knows about it, and there's zero competition. Versus just because it's not on domain or realestate.com, then that doesn't mean it's off market. We're buying properties on a conservative bank valuation for, say, that $1 million. And at auction, it might go $1,050,000 or 1.1. So sure, a buyer's agent costs 2%, but if we save you 5 or 10 and we find you a better property, then it should have paid it 3 or 4 times over.
Anything to add there, John?
No, I think you've covered that. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, cool. I think the other important thing as well, I use buyers agents, and we've worked together for a while now. It's night and day when you look at the statistics long term. You know, when someone tries to find something themselves, they generally overpay for it. You know, they might not know which way the sun comes up or which catchment zone it's in for a particular school. It might be one street away, you know, from being in that next suburb, which grows, you know, it's got the Maroubra address versus the Pagewood address as an example. And people just don't know the long-term, you know, negative impacts of that. They think they're getting a good deal at the time, and actually they're investing in something which is a bit of a dud. And even in a city like Sydney, you know, you can still get duds.
I think something to add to that as well is that when people sell their property, they normally use a real estate agent to help them sell. You know, it's their biggest asset. And so if you're looking to buy your biggest asset, why wouldn't you, and you've never done it before, why wouldn't you help? Why wouldn't you seek help to make sure that you're buying the right thing? You know, Chris used the example of buying a car. We don't operate, I'm not a dentist. I don't pull my own teeth out. I don't represent myself in court. You have people that can do that for you. You know, as an expat, I used a visa agent to keep me here. So I think it's the same with property. And I think in Sydney, where it's, I mean, I joked earlier on about it being a sport, it's very, very competitive. And around those price points that Chris mentioned, that kind of 700 to 2 million, you know, they're the median price points in a lot of areas. There's a lot of people. Now, you're competing with investors, you know, fellow investors like us. You're competing with first-time home buyers. You're also competing with downsizers that all want to live in those locations. So why wouldn't you try and get an advantage by using someone that's worked in those locations for the last 20 years?
And the classic thing at auction is people say, oh, look, I only paid $1,000 more than someone else, and so that means I paid market value. But if the property is only worth $1 million compared to comparable properties, and 2 people have been approved by the bank for 1.2, they're not going to have done all those comparables to say, no, I'm stopping at $1 million. They carry on because they fall in love with the property, and they basically bid what the bank will lend them, not what the property's worth. And then the guy that then borrows an extra $1,000 and goes 1.201 says, well, that's market price, which you could argue it is, but he's basically paid 200 grand more than the property's worth that we could have got it. So when we go to buy an investment, we never go to auction. So in 20 years, literally never have been to auction for an investment property. And that's the reason why. We can't compete with stupid people that have got too much money. Even if our clients have got more, we wouldn't go $1 over that $1 million. Whereas whenever our clients sell, we say, don't sell it to us because we're not going to pay you top dollar. Take it to the best agent, do the best marketing campaign, style the property, take it to auction. That's your best chance of getting top dollar.
Yeah, okay, cool. Great insight. I'll get to the last question, then we'll wrap it up for today's episode. This person said, hi all, we are holding off purchasing property because we are scared that the property prices will crash. After spending the last 4 years living like two broke uni students with a baby, we are in the process of selling one of our investment properties to pay off our principal place of residence. I'm already thinking about buying my next investment property a few hours away from Sydney that has good rent and is a cheap house. My family think I'm mad for wanting to buy outside of Sydney and selling the existing investment property. What do you think I should do?
Sure. So the main thing is there's no right or wrong. I'm generally not a fan of selling because you pay all those costs to get out and get back in. But if you've got something growing at, say, 2% historically, and you can sell and rebuy and get something that's growing at 7 or 8%, sure, you're going to be on the back foot for a couple of years. But after that, then obviously that's going to take over and it's worth doing. And we're currently doing that or looking at that for a client that's bought quite a few properties. Again, to buy out of Sydney, it all depends on affordability and things like that. So even though we're saying buying in these good areas at 1 or 2 million, or even from 500 or 600 grand plus, we would prefer to have a much, much smaller unit in an area with no more supply. Look, for some people, like we've bought up in Newcastle and places like that people want a lot more land. But it's very, very hard to tell without looking at those specific circumstances. And again, it's very easy for someone to jump in and just give people all these advice. But you need to know where those properties are located. You need to know for a young family if they're struggling with cash flow and how much that's going in there. So that's why quite often a mortgage broker is the best person to go to because, again, financial planners can be biased. Mortgage brokers typically aren't. As long as they're lending money, then that's the main thing. And they generally haven't got that kind of emotion. So I'd say work with the mortgage broker probably most of the time. And again, to work out the cost of getting out and getting back in and what the serviceability looks like. But one thing to remember is with the banks, every few years, the banks come up with a blacklist where they're scared about property prices dropping, that they've overlent in those areas. Typically, those areas are areas where there's massive redevelopment. There's a lack of demand in those areas. So think of the Piermonts back in 2000. Now think about places like Parramatta CBDs, or like Olympic Park again in those areas, or the Zetlands and stuff like that, where there's massive overdevelopment. That's the scary areas. So as you go further out of Sydney, it's more likely you could be picking one of those areas.
Cool. Thank you very much, guys. Cheers for your time. Please like and subscribe to the channel. This is the first episode. We're going to have many more of these episodes. And yeah, we'll catch you next time.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.